What's going on, everybody? It's RoarYoe, and welcome back to another episode of Sleeper Sunday. Sleeper Sunday, for those of you who don't know, is a series I came up with showcasing fun hidden decks you may not know about that can deal quite a bit of damage in the proper hands. We'll be going over a basic deck list, strengths, weaknesses, what can be done to make the deck better, and of course a few replays to see the deck in action. In today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at the winner of this month's poll, Novelis. Novelis is an archetype of mostly dark ritual monsters with types varying between warrior and beast warrior, based on different types of French cuisine. They were also made to support a classic ritual monster in the form of Hungry Burger, though outside of matching their stat line of being a dark warrior ritual and being mentioned on the boss monster in Counter Trap, there's not a whole lot of relation. It's not like it centers around the card like Dark Magician, for example. They were released in Deck Build Pack Wild Survivors in June of 2023, with their most recent support being out of Age of Overlord in October of 2023, and they have no extra deck monsters of their own, but they do synergize with outside extra deck monster Pasticcio Couverture in one of their support cards, so yippee. And without further ado, let's get right into the deck list, starting off with 2 copies of Brilibase de Novelis, and I am not going to pronounce a single one of these words properly. Not gonna lie, I kind of don't care. Feel free to mock me in the comments, but I'm not even gonna try, let's be honest. So Brilibase de Novelis is a level 1 Dark Beast Warrior ritual that says you can ritual summon this card with a recipe card. If it's special summoned period, you can excavate the top 5 cards of your deck, and if you do, you can add a 1 excavated Novelis card to your hand, also shuffle the rest into the deck. When a card or effect is activated that targets this card on the field, or when this card is targeted for an attack, quick effect, you can tribute this card and 1 attack position monster on either field, and if you do, special summon 1 level 2 or 3 Novelis ritual monster from your hand or deck, and you can only use each effect once per turn. So Brilibase sets off the standard for most of the monsters in the deck by having an effect on ritual summon, as well as an effect that involves it being targeted or swung at by tributing attack position monsters, including itself, in order to special more Novelis monsters from the deck. There's only 2 monsters that slightly fall out of this mold in the archetype. Everything else kind of just falls right into place. Brilibase is one of the most important ones, not only because it has a pretty decent search effect, or search I should say, it's more like a pot of prosperity than anything, but also by being a level 1, meaning that you can bake it with literally any monster as long as you have a recipe card, and there is a specific recipe card that is mentioned, or at least mentions this card I should say, that not only makes the deck work with pre-prep, but also makes it have an additional effect that's really solid. This is basically the one that you want to be starting with most of the time. Next up, for the level 2, we have Confiris de Novelis that says you can also ritual summon it with a recipe card, which is mentioned on all of them, so I'll stop mentioning it. If it's special summon, you can target 1 spell or trap on the field, destroy it, and when a card or effect is activated, blah blah blah, it summons a 3 or 4 Novelis. So all of them climb up 1 to 2 levels higher than themselves. I should also have mentioned that. Confiris is definitely a bit of a weaker one. It is level 2, so it is pretty easy to summon, and it has a tie-in with one of the recipe cards, the second recipe card of the 2 ritual spells. But overall, it's not really the most insane card in the deck, but it can be a pretty decent piece of removal, especially because it's on special summon, not just on ritual summon, which is a key point to note on all of these monsters. So you'll be able to pop it off with things like Dynamondo as well. Just make sure that you properly summon it if you want to summon it back off Dynamondo. The level 3 is Poetis de Novelis, that says on special summon it draws 1 card. The level 4 is Fueglacia, which it basically gets an Ishizu effect on summon. You target up to 3 cards in any graveyard and shuffle them into the deck. And they finally stray away from the exact, specific targeting thing by going into Balemuniere de Novelis, however you pronounce that. It is a level 5 Beast Warrior that can also be summoned with a recipe card, and on summon, you can add any Novelis or recipe card from your deck to your hand. Very powerful search effect there. But instead of having the effect if it's targeted or swung at, you can just simply target an attack position monster your opponent controls, tribute it, and if you do, special summon 1 level 6 Novelis ritual monster from your hand or deck, and it is a quick effect if this card is special summoned by the effect of a Novelis monster. So basically off of either Poetis or Fueglacia. This card is incredibly powerful because it is not only a search card, but it's also a really strong piece of removal because you can just use it at any point, especially if you summon it off of your level 3 or 4, which is most of the time the way you're bringing it out on board, though even going second or on turn 3, you can use it as a pretty good piece of removal on your turn. But this is the easiest way to access the boss monster of the deck on the opponent's turn, that being Beldgril de Novelis. This is the one that is on the pack of Wild Survivors, and that was revealed first. It says on special summon you can negate the effects of all face-up cards your opponent currently controls, including back row by the way, and then if this card was special summoned by the effect of a Novelis monster, so basically off of the level 5, you can tribute as many monsters your opponent currently controls as possible. That's not even all it does though, because as a quick effect, you can also tribute another attack position monster your opponent controls to special a Hungry Burger directly from your hand or deck. So this is the mention of Hungry Burger on the boss monster. Very cool. It goes along with the counter trap, which we'll mention later when we get into it, but not really too much to mention. But it does basically mean that the Balamwiniere, whatever you want to call it, the level 5, he turns into Bale Grill as well as Hungry Burger while tributing bare minimum 3 monsters, because you have 1 tribute here, 1 tribute here for the summon of this, and bare minimum 1 tribute when you summon the Bale Grill. And remember, you can climb all the way up to here by starting off with just the level 1 by going 1, 3, 5, 6, because you can just skip over like the Conferus and the Fueglacia, which is another reason why you only play 1 of each, even though it's also just because their effects are just kind of mediocre. For the longest time, and by the longest time I mean like a couple of months, these were the only monsters that Novellas actually had, making it like a Megalith situation where you're only really summoning them off of their ritual spell or off of their own effects, because they didn't have like any actual monsters. But out of Age of Overlord, they got Poissonnière de Novellas. It is a level 1 Pendulum monster, skill 8, and it is a fairy, so it does break the mold a little bit that way, with a pendulum effect that says if you control a ritual monster, you can target 1 monster on the field, special summon this card, then change that monster's battle position. You can only use this effect once per turn, and as a monster effect saying on summon, you can activate one of these effects. Add 1 level 1 ritual monster or a recipe card from your deck to your hand, or you can banish any number of recipe cards from your graveyard and special summon 1 Novellas ritual monster from your hand with a level equal to the number banished. You can only use this effect of Poissonnière once per turn, and if it's attributed on the field and added to the extra deck face up, you can place it in your Pendulum Zone. This card kind of just does everything for the deck. So on summon, it essentially acts as a Rhoda, which is really solid. Unfortunately, it's not like a pre-prep. You don't get a recipe card and the Barilla base, but you're usually just going to grab the Barilla base off of this card because it's just super solid, because she is a level 1, so she gives you immediate tribute fodder. Speaking of tribute fodder, if she's tributed, she goes straight to the Pendulum scale, meaning that you can use her really strong Pendulum effect. And the Pendulum effect seems pretty underwhelming. I mean, ooh, you can make something attack position to tribute it. But remember, your ritual monsters say targeted for any effect, not just your opponent's. So what you usually do with Poissonnière is that you target your own monsters, triggering their effect to summon from the deck, and that still allows her to special summon herself, because you don't have to you don't have to change the battle position in order to special summon her. You special summon her and then change the battle position. So either you're changing your opponent's monster to attack position to get a tribute, or you're just triggering your ritual monster and getting a free other level 1 body on board, and her effect to place in the Pendulum Zone isn't a hard once per turn, and so you can just place her back there to use the effect later. You also have a way to summon her directly from the deck, actually 2 ways, one of which being the other card out of Age of Overlord, and one of which being a card we'll get into in just a moment, and so she's just a super solid card overall, really helps tie the deck together. We can also fit in 3 copies of Cyber Angel Ben 10, because we are distributing things generically, because, you know, we're not using the cursed Drytron engine, so we can use this to search not only our Poissonnière, but also the most important normal summon in the deck, being Diviner of the Harem. Diviner is really good, as always, in a ritual deck, not only because it's dumping things like Arclight, it's also really good at sending cards like Natus to get a little bit of removal, and also making it a level 6 means you can summon any ritual monster you desire, but also tributing it not just off of the ritual spells, but also off of the effects of your Novellas cards, can summon your Poissonnière directly from your deck. So if you don't normal summon your Poissonnière and you normal the Diviner instead, so long as she's tributed, which is going to be really easy when you summon any of your rituals off of her, or if you use any of the effects to tribute her, you can summon the Poissonnière and continue your plays even further, especially just because how good Poissonnière is. So Diviner is a huge card for the deck. There's also a lot of draw power in the deck, so we are playing 3 Ash and 3 Droll for our hand traps. You don't really search too much on your opponent's turn, so Droll's not really a huge deal, and it can help slow the game state down to your pace, because this is a deck that requires a little bit of tempo most of the time. Moving on to the back row, we have 3 copies of Novellas Restaurant at Table. It says when this card is activated, you can add 1 recipe card from your deck or graveyard to your hand. Once per turn, you can place 1 ritual monster from your hand on the bottom of the deck to draw 1 card, and once per turn during your end phase, you can target 2 cards in your graveyard, including a recipe card, place them on the bottom of your deck in any order, then draw 1 card, and you can only activate 1 Novellas at Table per turn. Overall, it's a pretty solid field spell. I mean, on activation, it searches anything in your archetype, and by anything, I mean like the good cards, because the recipe cards are kind of just the best things to search. It also gives you not 1, but 2 separate draw effects, one of which allowing you to put cards like your Beelgrill and Bala Munir into your deck so you can summon them from your deck instead of just ritual summoning them, and it gives you a replacement card as well. And the end phase recursion is really good. The recursion in this deck in general is just really solid because they have a lot of effects that add from deck or graveyard to hand, but also this allowing you to put stuff back in your deck for later, such as your level 5 and 6 ritual monsters, or even Hungry Burger if you really want to. And then getting another draw to draw things like Ash, Droll, or anything like that. It just feels really nice overall. Their first of 2 recipe ritual spells is Recette de Poisson, Fish Recipe. I'll just refer to it as Fish Recipe. It can be used to summon any Novellas ritual monster, and you must tribute from your hand or field whose total levels equal or exceed the level. Then if you ritual summon specifically Barilla Base, you can add a 1 recipe ritual spell from your deck or graveyard to your hand, except Fish Recipe. So this card's really good, not just because it adds a card from your deck or graveyard to your hand as a second effect, but it's also not a hard ones per turn. I just hate when, like, in archetype ritual and fusion spells and stuff like that are hard ones per turns, because it just really limits the ceiling of what the deck can do. But luckily here that isn't the case, and not only is the ritual summon not a hard ones per turn, but the add effect is also not a hard ones per turn. So if for some reason you summon Barilla Base twice in one turn, you can add a recipe card twice, a ritual spell I should say. So basically only one other card, but still you can add from graveyard, so that's really good. And of course the target is the 1 copy of the Recette de Viande, which is Meat Recipe. It has the same ritual summon conditions as Fish Recipe, but if you summon Conferus, you can change all defense position monsters your opponent currently controls to attack position. So you can probably tell why we only play 1. Not only is it very searchable off Fish Recipe, but it has a pretty mediocre effect. Not only do you have to summon one of the weaker Novellas monsters in order to actually use it, but it only works when you're going second or on turn 3, and even then a lot of decks aren't really placing things in defense position all the time. The things are already going to be in attack, so most of the time you're just adding this as either like discard fodder, an additional resource, or to just ritual summon again when you don't have access to like a second Fish Recipe or something. It's like a free ritual spell off of a ritual spell, so you can't really complain much there, and they don't really have any other targets. Their next card is Voici la Carte, which is today's menu. Not a Novellas card or a recipe card or anything like that. It reveals 2 Novellas monsters with different names from your deck. Your opponent chooses 1 for you to add to your hand and shuffle the other back into the deck. Then you can add 1 of these cards from your deck or graveyard to your hand based on the monster type added to your hand by this effect. If you added a Beast Warrior, you add Fish Recipe, or if you add a Warrior, you add Meat Recipe. So again, this card isn't a Novellas card or a recipe card, meaning it is completely unsearchable in the archetype, but it is such a powerful card to open, because this kind of guarantees you access to Fish Recipe, because let's be real, most of the time you're not going to reveal a Warrior, you're going to reveal Barilla Base and then something such as Poelitis, or even potentially a Bala Munir, in order to add Fish Recipe from your deck to your hand. If they're foolish enough to add Barilla Base to your hand, then you can just go straight into pumping out a bunch of bodies, going for things like the Fish Recipe into the Meat Recipe into yada yada. But even if they don't choose Barilla Base, you can still get a free draw and climb up into your Bala Munir. Or if you go for the Bala Munir, depending on if you open like a Diviner or something that can help you go into it, you can just search for anything that you really want instead. And so it's not really a lose at any point. It just does suck that it's not searchable. Another really powerful non-searchable card for the deck is Concours de Cuisine, or Culinary Confrontation. It's a quick play spell that says choose 1 Novellas Pendulum monster and 1 Peticial Pendulum monster from your hand, deck, and or extra deck, and special summon both monsters, 1 to each field. Also for this turn, you cannot use monsters as material for Fusion, Synchro, Xyz, or Link Summon, except Novellas and Peticial monsters. Also during your main phase, you can banish this card from your graveyard, then target 1 face-up monster on the field. It gains 200 attack for each recipe card in the graveyards. You can only use each effect once per turn. So again, another incredibly powerful card for the deck, but bogged down by not being searchable. But this is such an amazing card to open, because not only are you getting your Poissonnaire and all the amazing effects that she gives you from your deck, but you're also getting a Peticial Couverture that you're usually giving to your opponent, which gives them a free attack position monster for you to tribute with your effects, and so you really don't have to worry about getting rid of your own stuff if you go first. Not to mention, it's kind of funny against jank stuff like Castra and stuff, even though Cash hasn't really done anything since Arise Heart got banned. But the second effect, remember what I said about Poissonnaire with the targeting effect, how it's mostly just there to trigger your stuff? The same really goes here. I mean, you can use it to actually gain attack and try to beat over things, especially for things like your Beelgrill or even your Bala Munir. But at the end of the day, you're mostly using this to trigger your effects, and if you use it along with the Poissonnaire, you can climb up easily into Ballonniere off of just your Barilla base in the beginning of your turn. Really, really solid, just again, sucks that it's not searchable. But hey, it's a quick play, so you can even use it as a disruption to get follow-up and to brick up your opponent's board with a Petitio Couverture. They also have 2 trap cards, the first one being Recette de Personnel or Staff Recipe. It says you can target 1 ritual monster you control, special at a Novellas token, it is a Fiend Dark level 1 with 50 attack and defense, and it copies that monster's level. And you can send this face-up card from your spell and trap zone to the graveyard or ritual summon 1 Novellas ritual monster from your hand by tributing monsters from your hand or field whose total levels exactly equal the ritual monster's level. And you can only use each effect once per turn. So the second effect isn't going to be coming up very often. I mean, I think I use it maybe once in the replays. It can come up especially for things like the Conferus as a disruption or the Fueglacia. But most of the time, you're using this card for its first effect to trigger your targeting effects as always. This also does get you a free, like, up to level 6 body, which is pretty solid, I will admit that, especially if you do use the second effect to summon something like a Bale Grill. But most of the time, you're using this to target one of your things if you couldn't climb on your turn. You can just use it on your opponent's turn to start triggering all of your stuff. You can use it during the draw phase and stuff like that. But it also does give you a free attack position monster if you want for your effects as well, so you can use the effect of whatever you already climbed into. Like if you go Barilla base, target it with this, trigger the effect to tribute like something else on board, summon your Poeltis. Now you have another attack position monster in case your Poeltis gets targeted, so that you can trigger to go into like your Ballonniere, stuff like that. And their other trap, Chef's Special Recipe, is a counter trap that says when a spell, trap card, or monster effect is activated while you control a Novellas ritual monster, negate the activation, then if you control a monster that was special by the effect of a Novellas, you can destroy that card. If you special summon Hungry Burger, you can banish it from your graveyard to tribute as many monsters your opponent currently controls as possible. So first effect is pretty solid. I mean, it's just an Infernity Barrier. It doesn't always destroy, but I mean, sometimes you don't want it to destroy. It does have the option, which I think is pretty solid. So you can prevent things like Unchained cards from triggering, for example. Though most of the time, if you want it to, it will be able to destroy. The second effect, again, is another thing why it ties into Hungry Burger. And it seems like a pretty powerful effect. The main thing is that sometimes you have to time it properly, because Bale Grill is already tributing a monster to summon the Hungry Burger on board, but then on top of that, you want to tribute like everything off of this, so sometimes it is a bit hard to time it when your opponent has multiple monsters you want to tribute without them having like a disruption up to stop you. So it is a bit annoying sometimes, but I mean, hey, it does tribute every monster your opponent currently controls, so I mean, that's pretty solid. As I mentioned earlier, you do have access to pre-prep, not just to search your fish recipe, but if you really want to, you can search for the meat recipe. Maybe your opponent has a really annoying Floodgate and you want access to your Conferus, but really, really good card. I love getting an insane +1 off pre-prep, and also we can play Preparation of Rites because all of them are 6 or lower, and you can use it to grab back your fish recipe, which can grab your meat recipe, and yada yada. And of course, Called by the Grave is Called by the Grave. That's it for the main deck. Moving on to the extra deck, as I mentioned, we are on the Petitio Couvertures for our Culinary Confrontations. That's really all she's here for. We're not playing any jank pendulum things. She doesn't really have any like cool effects. She's not going to go into the pendulum zone most of the time. She's just there for the Culinary Confrontation. We're also playing the 1 Natus in case we want to trigger off the Diviner. Comes up actually very frequently, especially on going second or turn 3. Baron is here in case you want to use your Fueglacia, or if you have another way that you want to access the Baron for a free disruption. Same with the Ravenous Croco Dragon Archithes. You do have the Poeltis that you can go into with it. 2 copies of Arclight to send off the Diviner. Underworld Goddess to out towers monsters because you can't really out them reliably off of these. Access Code to help push for game. Unicorn for removal. Dynamondo is an insane card for ritual decks. Really awesome removal, recursion, and double recursion even, because it's shuffling a monster, or a card on the field, sorry, and a ritual monster in your grave into the deck, and it's really just super good. And also, it's a 2200 attack, link 2, just requires a ritual monster bare minimum. And also, you can summon a ritual monster from your grave on the opponent's turn, or add it to your hand, which is really helpful that it adds to hand, because that can help bring back the ones that you didn't summon properly, which you're going to be doing a lot in this deck. SP Little Knight, of course, is SP Little Knight. IP Masquerena to go into SP Little Knight, or a Unicorn, really up to you. And of course, Linkuriboh is here because you can make it off the Poissonnaire, of course, funnily enough, to go into like SP. But Fun fact, she only has to be attributed to go into the Pendulum Zone, so if you have her on board and you tribute her off of the Linkuriboh, you can place her in your Pendulum Zone to have her for later, which is really, really good, especially because Linkuriboh is a quick effect, so you can like go Culinary Confrontation on the opponent's turn, summon your plus a Nair, and then search off of her, and then trigger Linkuriboh because it's a quick effect, tribute her, put her in the Pendulum Scale. Really great for setup. That's it for the extra deck, very quick rundown. You're not using it like all too often other than like dumping and stuff like that. Onto some stuff that I either have run or you could run. I was running a small incantation package based off the list that I was using. I will put it in the description down below, the list that I used as a template. The Chalice Slime, Talismandra, Candle, and Inception, these were all the exact ratio too. It was just one of each of these. It didn't really do anything, and I felt like being locked out of my extra deck even remotely did kind of suck when I wanted to make cards like SP Little Knight or Dynamondo, and they just kind of put my deck up to 50 cards, which I didn't really like very much, especially in a deck that already kind of bricks sometimes, and so I just decided to cut them, and I haven't really missed them since. You will probably see the Talismandra, I think, in one of the replays, but that was like, I think, the first replay I got with the deck when I was starting, and I have like a few misplays in that video, which you'll find to be pretty funny. You can also play Effect Veiler because you can't really reliably play Impermanent here because you are drawing a lot of cards. So if you want to draw into Veiler, especially in a format where Droll maybe isn't as powerful, then you can just absolutely replace Droll with Veiler and just put Droll on the side. And also because you do play a few Beast Warriors, if you really want to grab Poeltis or the Barilla base that badly, you can grab it off of Tenki, though there's really no real need. That's going to do it for the deck list. Again, I will link down below the deck list that I used as a sort of template. I do have a few tweaks and changes, such as the incantation package being removed. And I don't remember if SP Little Knight was actually in that video, because I think it was before Little Knight was revealed. I'm not sure. But with those out of the way, let's go ahead and get right into some replays. Alright, that's gonna do it for the replays that I got for novellas. I kind of got these in a bit of a rush because this holiday season's been a little rough, so I've been like unable to really spend a lot of time for this Sleeper Sunday. That's why a lot of it might seem really sloppy, and so I kind of just got like the first 3 W's that I got. To be fair, I didn't lose any though, so that's pretty neat. But with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start talking about the strengths. Starting with Attributing being a very powerful piece of removal, in fact, one of the best in the game. It doesn't trigger most floating, and the lack of targeting means it bypasses most protection as well. Just watch out for like Eater of Millions, I guess. There's also plenty of removal in the deck, period, not even just from the novellas cards, but even things like Dynamondo being able to be accessed because of it being a ritual deck, and even Diviner setting the Tusk in a pinch is just super good. Not to mention the Baron and Archithes that she can also access. Powerful cards like Poissonnaire and Culinary Confrontation not only provide extra consistency for the deck, but also let you play a bit more on your turn than the opponents by targeting your things a bit early. The extension also makes accessing powerful toolbox cards like IP and SP a lot more accessible without wasting all the valuable ritual bodies that you'd otherwise be putting on board. As I mentioned earlier, the deck also has loads of recursion, like between Foiglacia, At Table, Fish, Recipes Add Back, Pre-Prep, Prep, even Dynamondo. It is incredibly difficult to stop this deck from coming back from a blowout after it gets rolling even in the slightest. On top of the recursion, it also has really solid draw power to either dig for consistency pieces to keep playing or to have follow-up, or even for powerful hand traps like Ash and Droll. But of course, where there are strengths, there are always chinks in the armor. Let's get on to the weaknesses, starting off with comparing to something like Rika Konkone, none of the tributing actually happens for cost. This makes the effects much more fragile to try and pop off, doesn't dodge all protection like Noir's activated effect protection, and gives your opponents much more chances to react to the effect for you to get less value out of it. Speaking of chances to react, climbing your opponent's turn gives your opponent so many ways to stop you from climbing up. Not only do they have to target things or attack to trigger the effect, they kinda just end up folding to cards like Access Code Talker more often than not. Plus, cards like Droplet are just kind of a game ender, or even Chalice, as you won't have a big enough body on board to protect you if you didn't climb on your turn with cards like your Poissonnaire and Culinary Confrontation. Finally, being an archetype of almost all rituals means you can end up with a lot of dead hands. Yes, you have a good amount of ways to access your ritual summons, like you have Diviner as a good fill-in for a normal, Poissonnaire, Confrontation, today's menu, everything like that, but you can only see the exact ritual monster you want so many times instead of a random one, and it feels pretty bad in a grind game of top decking should you come down to it, especially in a deck that can't play a Drytron engine. That being another weakness, due to needing to summon Poissonnaire specifically, meaning you're locked out of the best ritual engine in the game. So that being said, how are we making the deck better? I actually think that the deck is pretty solid overall, one of the better ones we've covered on this series, so I don't think too much needs to be done. I think adding more non-ritual monsters to the deck though would be pretty nice. I get what they wanted to do at first by like having a Megalith situation with all ritual monsters, but maybe by seeing just how crazy Poissonnaire ended up being for the deck as not only a really good card in general, but also a non-ritual monster, they'll consider adding more regular main deck monsters so you don't just brick on rituals all the time. Speaking of Poissonnaire, another Petitio monster to go along with it for Culinary Confrontation for the extra deck or even main deck would also be pretty cool. Doesn't even have to be summonable if it's from the extra deck, similar to the current one, but I think having more options, especially if it actually has a decent usable effect, would be pretty neat as well, so you don't have to play like the really useless fusion. Finally, just one more recipe ritual spell would be so nice. Fish Recipe's only current target is Meat Recipe, which summons a mediocre monster compared to Barilla Base, and whose second effect only works going second or on turn 3. Maybe even like a veggie recipe that says if you summon a 5 or 6 with it, you get an additional effect. Like, I know it doesn't fit with the whole Beast Warrior being fish and Warrior being meat theme or whatever, but it is an option they can do. But with that being said, I don't know how much more I can say about novellas. I think it's a overall solid deck. I think honestly in its current state, you could probably take it to a regional and do pretty like decent with it. The main thing, like I said, is like, as you can see, we're like a 46 card deck, right? There's just so many like unsearchable power cards like today's menu and Culinary Confrontation and stuff that you kind of have to open to get your consistency plays going and just pray you don't get ashed or drolled. And there's just a lot of hands that you'll probably end up seeing like a bunch of ritual monsters and no ways to summon them because these cards are just so like hard relying on drawing them. Not to mention you do have to play the Hungry Burger if you want to get the best effects out of Bale Grill and the Chef's Special recipe, so that can end up just being really gross to look at, and then it just doesn't really feel great a lot of the time. Not to mention, it's just super hard to climb on the opponent's turn, which is why it's so good to go first and have access to your Culinary Confrontation and or your Poissonnaire. I think though that this is definitely one of the decks on the series that is actually solid in its current state, and probably just needs a little bit more of a push for it to actually see some sort of relevance, but I don't know, that's just my opinion. Let me throw some in the comments below, because that's going to do it for the video. If you liked it, please sure to leave a like, as I'll put this video and the channel into recommended. And if this content, I'm sure you like it, like the rest of my Sleeper Sundays, then perhaps consider subscribing and turning on notifications, because it supports the channel more than anything else, and it's absolutely free. Also remember that this was chosen via a poll, and those polls will go up at around the end of every month or the beginning of every month, something like that, and they will not be up for more than 24 hours, so be sure to get your vote in when you see it in the community tab. Also, speaking of which, if you want to help vote for the decks that are put into the poll, then be sure to check out my Patreon down in the description below. For just $5 a month, you can get a bunch of awesome perks, such as being able to have your name listed in the end of the video, such as like all of my main ones except for review videos, as well as having access to all of my PNGs as they're made, occasional early access to content as soon as I end up putting it out, because a lot of the time I just get it out like the night before, and of course the ability to suggest decks for Sleeper Sunday. Also, to support me directly while getting some awesome TCG merchandise in the process, check out Tapio cards in the link down below. Use code AURORA5 for 5% off your purchase at checkout and support me financially. Once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Aurora, signing off.